Now, if you've been to Walt Disney World for the holidays or even in the middle of the summer, you know that the crowds at Walt Disney World can get intense.
I have to tell you, I cannot understand these crowds at all. Did I miss something?
In this video, I'm going to give you my 2017 Disney crowd calendar so that you have a better idea of when the crowds will be there and when it will be a slower season and not as many people will be at Walt Disney World. Now, before I get started, let me say that these crowd levels can vary quite a bit. No matter which crowd calendar you look at, they can vary quite a bit. For example, in September, which is one of the lowest crowd levels at Walt Disney World, you'll notice maybe on a random weekend, maybe there's been a few storms, the weather hasn't been so good, and everyone in Florida all of a sudden decides to go to Walt Disney World. So it can vary every single day. So just kind of take this as a general idea of when the crowds could be higher versus when they're usually lower. Now, in this video, just for reference, I'm using a 1 to 10 Michael crowd level scale. So if it's a 1, it's very, very low crowds. If it's a 10, it's really, really high crowds. And if it's an occasional 11, it usually means that I expect the park to be closed because it filled to capacity. Okay, let's get started with January. The first week of January is notoriously crowded. A lot of winter breakers are still there. Maybe those who celebrated the New Year's at Disney, they're still around too. But the second week and third and fourth, they're usually not as crowded. So January, the end of January, not a bad time to be there. Now, February at Walt Disney World is a tricky month. They'll start off maybe a 3 or 4 out of 10, and then all of a sudden they'll get maybe 9 out of 10 in the middle of the month, and then at the end of February, it's not so crowded, maybe a 2 out of 10 again. So February varies back and forth. Now, March kicks off the Epcot International Flower and Garden Festival, one of my favorites, and that first week in March is a great time to go. I use that time to go to Flower and Garden Festival because I love it. The crowds are relatively low, maybe a 3 or 4 out of 10. But later in March, it gets more and more crowded. You'll notice maybe it'll be an 8 or maybe a 9 out of 10 on some days in the middle or end of March.
You might recognize the Mad Tea Party behind me. Would you believe it's also the location of the start of the standby line? I'm glad I have a fast pass.
Now, as we move from March to April, the spring breakers are there, they're enjoying it. You'll notice maybe the first week or 2 of April are extremely crowded. Maybe an 8, 9, or 10 out of 10 day in April. It's extremely crowded at Walt Disney World, but by the end of April, maybe the last 2 weeks, it's not as crowded, maybe even a 2 or 3 out of 10. Now, the first third of May till about my birthday has a tendency to be relatively not so crowded, maybe a 4 out of 10. But as you move further into May, the crowds for the summer come out, you're looking at 8 to 10 out of 10 days. At Walt Disney World, it gets super intense with those summer crowds. Now, throughout June, the crowds tend to be very, very heavy. 8 out of 10, maybe even 10 out of 10 on some days. In the middle of June, there's a lot of folks who are there for their summer vacation. July is very similar to June with a lot of folks there for 4th of July, and it stays maybe in that 8 or even 9 out of 10 level for most of the month of July. Now, as we get into August, the crowds start off pretty high, but by the end of August, it starts coming down like a stairway. Think of starting up maybe 8 or 9 out of 10, all the way down to getting about 3 out of 10 by the end of August because people are going back to school. Keep thinking about that school schedule. It relates very closely. September, one of my favorite times of year to go, simply because it's very low crowds. You're there, it feels like you're almost there by yourself. Not quite, maybe a 1 or 2 out of 10 day. It is the lowest crowd level at Walt Disney World throughout the year. In September, it's the lowest crowd level. Now, the last few days of September and the first few days of October, you'll notice the crowds will get a little bit heavier all of a sudden, and then they'll come back down. So first week or 2 of October, there'll be a little bit heavier crowds, maybe a 6 out of 10, maybe a 7, and then they'll come right back down, maybe a 4 or 3 out of 10.
I remember some.
A little crowded here on the weekends at the Epcot International Food and Wine Festival, but still magical.
Now, don't forget, in October, Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party happens on certain nights. So if you're there at the Magic Kingdom on a night with Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party, you can expect more crowds. Now, November fluctuates quite a bit. In the beginning of November, it's relatively low crowds. Then in the middle of November, you get some more crowds, maybe a 7 out of 10 in that area, and then it'll come back down at the end of November. Usually won't be as crowded near the end of November to the beginning of December. Now, December is a very interesting month at Walt Disney World. The first half of December is relatively low crowds. You're looking at 3 or 4 out of 10 days for the first half of December. The second half of December is the most intense crowds at Walt Disney World. You're looking at 10 out of 10 or 11 out of 10 for that last week of December, obviously for Christmas and New Year's. 11 out of 10. I'm telling you, the park will close because it reaches capacity. That is how intense the crowds are on that last week of December.
15 minutes prior to Wishes on a day between 2 holiday parties is an intense crowd. I am completely surrounded. I would say this is a 10 out of 10 high crowd day. Let me tell you, it is intense.
Now, don't forget, these crowd levels change every single day. So even in a month like September, a Sunday at the Magic Kingdom is going to be very very different than a Monday at the Magic Kingdom. Even in the middle of September with a low crowd month, you're going to notice a big difference simply because of the Florida residents, so the weekends do play a role. Now, if I had to pick my favorite times to be at Walt Disney World for 2017, my favorite times are beginning of March, probably 4th of July, even though the crowds are very intense, the fireworks are well worth it, and I would say September for the low crowds and December for the holiday season. It's just incredible. Now, I would love to hear from you. What is your favorite time of year to be at Walt Disney World? Do you try and avoid those crowds by going in September, or do you love the holiday season, you go in December? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being a part of the magic with me. Until next time, have a magical day.